Welcome to Codex History of Video Games. My name's Tyler Osby.
And I'm Mike Coletta.
And this week we continue our I was going to say jaunt. That's a word, right? Our jaunt through
our merry jaunt.
Console Wars. Yeah, by Blake J. Harris. We do this in a sort of book club style where we talk about specific chapters for the week. We're almost halfway through the book now. We're going to talk about chapters 21 through 25 today. So you should go buy this book and read it because we're not going to read it to you, but we are going to talk about these chapters. And I'm loving this book. It is definitely Sega slanted. Like, this book wants Sega to win the way they're telling the story. I wonder if that's because when Blake J. Harris set out to write this book, he was like, I wonder if he set out to be like, I'm going to talk to Tom Kalinske and tell the Sega story here with Nintendo in there, or if he's like, I got to tell this story, and Tom Kalinske is like the only one who would talk to him, and Nintendo was like, F off, we're not going to talk to you. And so he was like, well, I guess I have to tell it slanted then. I wonder if that was intentional or, you know what I mean?
I like to think he was like, I'm going to write a book on Sega versus Nintendo and the console wars. And he stood up from his desk and he took off his full Sonic the Hedgehog outfit and he hung up his Sega shirt and his Sega pants and he put on regular clothes. No, I'm just kidding.
Regular book writing clothes. You can't can't write books in your Sonic outfit, but you can wear it all of the other times.
They get you. Yeah, the gloves don't work with the keyboard.
Yeah. Also, it's really hot.
It is so hot. Oh man. Okay. I'm sorry, folks. We're in the heat wave right now. I'm dying in Washington.
Yeah,
it's very hot.
I'm also dying in Southern California. It's hot down here too.
We don't have AC in Washington because we've never needed it before. But here we go. Chapter 21 is called The Heart and the Brain. Kind of like Pinky and the Brain, but not really.
Yeah. Weren't there episodes of House called, there's like Wilson's Head and House's Heart or something like that?
I think so. Yeah.
They were really sad episodes too, as I recall. Anyway, this is not Codex History of House MD.
Yet.
Maybe we should do a watch-through podcast of House. Gosh,
there has to be a terrible House video game. There has to be. Can you look this up
it's
while I do
called,
this?
And if there isn't, it's not called House Everybody Lies, I'm going to be really upset.
I love that. Well, you look it up.
I'm looking it up right now.
We begin the chapter, and we're at the Alexis Park Hotel, and it's the Sega's big opening party ever since they've become big. Now, Sega's big now. We talked about this. They're big. They're doing it. They're doing the thing. They're going head-to-head with Nintendo. It is the opening party for the 1992 Consumer Electronics Show. And Kalinske is wearing a Sonic the Hedgehog tie, which I think is pretty cool. And he's also dancing. I mean, he's a company man, Kalinske.
Yeah.
So Diana Dare, who is the new marketing person in charge of the Game Gear, we talked about her a little bit last time, where she kind of took over handhelds from Steve Race after Steve Race decided to leave. And it turns out Nakayama, head honcho, calls her into his like office, which is just his hotel room, to talk to her, and it's like very intimidating. And then it's a funny story about there's an earthquake and she like hides under her desk. But the point is that she's doing a great job. She's doing a great job with the Game Gear, and he tells her that, and it's really awesome. But this chapter mostly is there to tell us a little more about the relationship between Dave Rosen and Hayao Nakayama. And Nakayama and Rosen are important because they both are Sega. Like, Dave Rosen officially started Sega when he started Rosen Enterprises, and they originally sold like photo booths when everyone needed an ID in post-World War II Japan. And then, so he was importing from the US coin-op photo booths. You know, the same kind that you'd use to like with your lover or whatever. I don't like the way I said that at all. I'm sorry,
sure.
Everybody.
Yeah, the same time the same kind that you would take pictures with your friends when you're out and about.
Yeah. So later, what ended up happening though is he went into other coin-op products, and so he would bring pinball and jukeboxes to the United States, and then he teamed up with another company in Japan called Nihon Goraku Busan, a Japanese jukebox company, and together they formed Sega because the translation of Nihon Goraku Busan is service games, which is that's how you translate it. So they made Sega as their corporation. Now, we've covered a lot of this in the past. I believe we talked about the founding of Sega in the Ultimate History of Video Games Volume 1.
Yeah, I'm sure we've been there and back a couple of times.
Yeah, so we're going to go through it really quick, just for people that then give you the TLDR. But Sega got really big when they made an electromechanical game called Periscope. And this is when they started. And Periscope, by the way, is great to watch. If you haven't seen Periscope, look up a YouTube video because it is a 10-foot long, 6-foot wide electromechanical game. And it was so expensive to play at the time, but it was so like spectacular, like actual spectacle, that it was very popular among people.
It was like cool to just look at it because it wasn't just like a screen with a video game on it. It was like a full-on electromechanical things, like actual physical pieces are moving around.
You like look down a periscope and you shoot ships and they explode in the background and just like a weird light, you know, it's really cool. And the popularity of Periscope actually made it so Rosen flipped his business model. So instead of importing coin-op machines from the US to Japan, he now built coin-op machines in Japan and shipped them to the US.
Okay.
And Periscope was so popular, fun little fact here, it was the first game to cost 25 cents to play.
Wow, that is extremely
I thought that was a really
expensive.
cool fact.
What's that with inflation these days? That's probably like $1.50 now, I bet.
Yeah, I mean, there's some games now that cost like ridiculous amounts of money in arcades where you're like, this is how many credits it costs? I mean, it's hard because you have to translate it from dollars to whatever Dave & Buster's uses as their credits.
Yeah, because they give you a card with credits on it. That's like, there's no more like coin-operated arcades. It seems like it's all cards like Dave & Buster's, or it's like an old school barcade where all the arcades are just free and like they're just a way to get people in the door to buy food and drinks.
Yeah, it's so funny. You're so right, because I used to say like family fun centers were coin operated, but now all the family fun centers are turning into Dave & Buster's with the card system. I have a card with like $5 on it from the Sherman Oaks Castle, which is this little like family fun center in the Valley in LA. And they have great mini golf too. But I'm like, I'm never going to use this again. What am I doing?
You can send it to me because that is within walking distance of my apartment.
I will send it to you. I will send that to you. Sega, we're skipping a lot of time here after Periscope. They're very popular. They make a lot of arcade games, but Sega was bought by Gulf and Western in 1969 under the condition that Rosen remained as CEO. That's how he sold it. They then got into the arcade game business in 1973, essentially copying Pong. Their game was called Pongtron, so not even really trying.
I feel like that's what everybody was doing in the early 70s. It was like nobody knew about games. Nobody even thought that games other than Pong could exist. It was just like, well, video game is Pong, so we're all making Pong.
There's a really fun little fact about that in a bit that I'm going to talk about, and I'm so excited you brought that up, that everyone was bootlegging. So Nolan Bushnell, this is a fun fact, a different fun fact, actually was going to sell Atari to Sega, but backed out the day of the deal because he successfully developed the Atari 2600. And when I say he did, I mean his team did.
The day of, they just like woke up that morning and like invented it.
The team got it to work essentially, and then he's like, I'm not going to sell. And then he made the 2600, and that became a whole thing.
Wow. World could have been very different today.
It could have been so different. So enter Hayao Nakayama. I hope I'm saying that right. I feel like I say it wrong every time, but Nakayama is going to be a doctor, but instead he left midway through college and got into the jukebox business. He did sales. Classic. Tales old as time.
Mm-hmm.
He eventually started his own arcade distribution company called Esco Trading. Now, Esco's main business was buying and selling used machines and using those, but then they eventually moved into just straight up bootlegging American arcades, including Sega.
Nice.
And Nakayama and Rosen met because Rosen wanted to meet the guy who had been stealing from him this whole time, which I think is funny. And Rosen was actually so impressed with Nakayama and his like sense of the business of like what machines people like, where to put them and that sort of stuff, that he actually bought Esco Trading and made Nakayama head of Japanese operations at Sega. Sega was so successful that in the 1980s, they made over $200 million per year.
That's a lot of dollars.
And then companies came and tried to bootleg. This is the interesting fact. What's interesting in the book is Blake J. Harris lists Nintendo as one of the bootleggers, because they were.
Wow. This guy is very, very pro Sega. I mean, not that that's necessarily untrue, but yeah.
Yeah, I just think it's so funny. He had them on a list of all the other bootleggers on there, and I'm like, that's so funny that he made sure to put it last, too, to be like, yeah, Nintendo. It's like, oh, man. Sega's success in the 1980s is where the title for the chapter, The Heart and the Brain, come from, because they were super successful at this time period. This is kind of before, like 1980s is right before the American arcade crash, but then Japan didn't have an arcade crash until much later, so they had the 80s as like their time. And many people thought of Nakayama as the heart of Sega and Rosen was the brain of Sega, but Harris argues that it was actually both of them, like working as kindred spirits, that made Sega successful. And I think I agree with that, because Rosen has the business sense of when to make what decision, but Nakayama has the arcade side of the business sense. Like, this is what people want from arcades. And I think the two of them together is what made Sega so great at this time.
That makes sense to me.
Well, thank you. Rosen retires in 1982, and he says the arcade business is headed for trouble. And guess what? He did totally just predict the American crash of arcade games in 1983, the year before. He totally nailed it. Nakayama was in charge of the Japanese side of things, but no one wanted anything to do with Sega in America. And in the end, Rosen, with Nakayama and Isao Okawa, who we've talked about on the podcast, bought Sega for $38 million as a group. So they all own Sega. And Nakayama would run the Japanese side of the business, which was almost all of the business. And there would be a small satellite that Rosen ran out of Beverly Hills that was Sega of America. And they continued their coin-op business until they saw what Nintendo did with Game & Watch, Donkey Kong and arcades, and then the NES. And they're like, oh, wow, this bootlegger is doing better than we are.
We got to do this video game thing.
Yeah. And that is what prompted Sega to make the Master System. But even making the Master System, it still felt like a losing battle, right? So they went back into coin-op until their R&D team created the first 16-bit console, the Sega Genesis. And then this is kind of where we're catching up to now. Then Rosen tried to sell... This is where Michael Katz comes in, because Rosen tries to sell the design to Atari. Like, we don't want to be a part of this, but we made it. Do you want to just buy this design from us and Atari can make the console? They pass, but Michael Katz worked for Atari at the time, and he loved the Sega Genesis so much that he moved to Sega because he believed he could sell the console. So that's how they get Michael Katz.
Could have been the Atari Genesis.
That would have been really cool. That's a really cool name, too.
Yeah. I love those, like, mashups of, like, you know, the Nintendo PlayStation was a thing that could have happened. The Atari Genesis is a thing that could have happened. I just like that when other companies could have made the
Me too. I totally agree with you. I'm a big fan of that. So this is where the rift between Rosen and Nakayama starts, is with the hiring of Michael Katz, because Rosen believed in Katz. And in the book, they say that Nakayama kind of clipped Katz's wings on purpose. Like, he wouldn't support him. And he kind of wanted to see how he did. It's almost like a test, but this guy might fail. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And he could, and keep in mind, Nakayama could fire Katz at any time, but he didn't want to upset Rosen, so he didn't do it, but he could have done it. Instead, he just wanted him to fail on his own. They talk about how Nakayama kind of saw it as like, if they let Michael Katz develop games internally at Sega for the Genesis, they'd be like, you're going over budget. And then if he went out to a third party to develop a game for the Genesis, he'd be like, you don't trust our developers? Like, he kind of is just like always pushing Katz. You know what I mean?
Like, he just can't win no matter what.
Yeah, he's always pushing Katz's buttons. And fun fact, this is where we learn, the big reveal of this chapter to me, is that Shinobu Toyota, our beloved Shinobu Toyota, was originally kind of a spy for Nakayama. He was there to give his input on Katz. That's why he was moved to America and Sega of America. So, and it's weird because in the book, they talk about how like Katz teaches him a lot of stuff about American business in 6 months, but Toyota still tells Nakayama that he should replace Katz, which is just, it's just a weird moment.
Dang, that's cold.
Right? It feels cold to me. It feels so cold. Sorry, I had to sip some water because I feel like I'm dying. So here we go. No one told me that during podcasting you could lose weight, but we're doing it. So this is fun. During Kalinsky's courting process with Nakayama, also, they don't really cover this in the beginning of the book. Nakayama intentionally leaves out Rosen. He tells Kalinsky, like, oh, don't worry about Rosen. I'm talking to Rosen. It's fine. Because he didn't want him to know that he was replacing Michael Katz.
Yeah.
So that kind of gives us this whole chapter kind of gives us the story up to this moment. The stuff we haven't seen, because we kind of caught in right when Kalinsky catches in, right? Mm-hmm. And now we're getting all of the background information this chapter. That brings us to the present at this opening party, CES 1992. And Kalinsky actually goes up and talks to Rosen and Nakayama and sits with them, but then they leave because they both say like, we're getting we're getting kind of tired. We're going to go home. But after they leave, there's a really weird conversation. Do you remember this, Tyler? Emil Heidkamp, I hope I'm saying that right. He's the senior VP of Konami, and he talks about the deal he made with Takuya Kazuki, gosh, I hope I'm saying that right, president of Konami, about how he didn't want violence, nudity, or debauchery in his games. And while Kazuki agreed, Heidkamp sees the world changing, where he's like, it's happening, and I can't do anything to stop it. And then this makes Kalinske, like, during this party, where he should be the happiest guy in the world because he has turned Sega around, he starts to think, like, this bad boy image we're making with Sega Genesis, it's going to be the game. We're making those games. We're going to be the ones that make the Mortal Kombats and the bloody games and put those out. So he has this kind of weird internal fight. And this is the second time that I think the heart and the brain is mentioned and why this chapter is called that. Because Kalinsky's brain is like, man, you did such a good job of business. You're doing it. You're getting this stuff done. You're selling Sega Genesis. But in his heart, he's like, am I doing the right thing? Am I like promoting a product I actually want kids to use? Because when he worked in toys, they're just toys, right? It's not a big deal.
Yeah, that's what he was doing. He was making toys, and like he has like a spot in his heart of like wanting to do the right thing for kids, right? And so feeling like he's contributing to the downfall of society in that sense, right? Is I can imagine, feeling that way. Even if you can see that that's the way the industry is going, it still probably feels bad to know that you're actually directly a part of it. If you think that's a bad thing, right? Like, I think today we would all agree that like that's not necessarily a bad thing. Yeah,
I think for him now, he's got to realize that Sonic the Hedgehog like touched so many kids' lives in a positive way, way more than say, like a Hot Wheels car or something. I don't know, but who knows? It's everyone else's gamble. Someone's going to be like, I love Hot Wheels cars and I am emailing your podcast because I am so upset. That's chapter 21, essentially, in a nutshell, as he goes, time to party, because he's like, can't think about it now, bye. And he like goes off and dances. They also are really into talking about the band in this chapter. Did you notice that? I kind of skipped that part in my notes, but they're really hyping up this band they hired. They're like Beat Generation or something. I don't know what their name is, but it's pretty great. They talk about, they're all these hits. They play everything. They can do no wrong, this band.
Only 80s Billy Joel.
Non-stop Alan Jackson Chattahoochee 24/7. Okay, so chapter 22 is called Target Practice, and this is a Nintendo chapter. You ready?
Yeah.
Ooh. It's kind of nice getting these little Nintendo chapters. So we open in a heated meeting with Peter Main and Randy Peretzman of Nintendo and the entire upper management of Target. They are in Minnesota, where Target is based, okay? And what is happening is, I found this hilarious that people were doing this. Customers were taking advantage of some very open-ended return policies at Target and other retailers specifically. They were returning NES consoles they had played for years to the store, getting the money, and then using that money to go towards a brand new SNES.
Wow.
And Nintendo figured this would happen with people who had like just bought an NES like a month before, but not people who had played theirs for years prior. And I love this because this is totally what I had friends do in college with their 360s, when they red ringed.
Yeah. So I guess red ring is maybe a little bit different, but like, this is sort of unheard of nowadays because there's like a 30-day return policy on stuff. Like if you buy a PlayStation 5 at a Target today and you want to bring it back in 2 years and say it's broken, they will laugh at you. They're not taking that back, right?
Yeah.
But I guess that was a thing in the 80s and 90s that like they would just take things back years and years and years later.
Yeah, and the way you specifically had to say the console was defective. That was how they did it. The retailer would take a console no matter what if you said it was defective. And the whole way it was like no receipt, no questions asked. Then the retailer would send the console back to Nintendo and get a refund. And what was happening is Nintendo is selling their new SNESs, but a big chunk of this money they're having to pay out in refunds to retailers.
Yeah. I assume they're getting like full price for the NES, whatever they paid for it, which is probably pretty close to what a Super Nintendo costs now.
Yeah, I think they're getting good money. And Nintendo consoles also, I should say, were rarely defective. They had less than a 1% problem rate with their consoles because Nintendo had a very in-depth troubleshooting process to check for defective consoles. They also had a whole department dedicated to returns and processing returns, which is how they caught this.
Wow.
They're like, why do we have this many returns? And all these consoles are getting sent back that they're defective, but they're not defective. And so Maine's proposal to Target was a 90-day return policy. After 90 days, you cannot return a new Nintendo. That's baloney. You have to keep it.
Which is how I guess it is nowadays. So I guess these folks ruined it for everybody.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where this starts. But Target didn't like that Nintendo wanted to ruin their Target's relationship with their guests. They call them guests, not customers, and they correct Peter Main in this chapter a lot, and I find it very funny. Because it's like their business vocab for the whole thing. What this chapter shows is how much Minoru Arakawa wanted efficiency in everything they did at Nintendo. Like, they talk about how he would find like the cheapest screws from the cheapest manufacturer to use on the casings of the cartridges. Every little detail he would look over to find the cheapest way to do something. And he'd been doing this for so long that retailers were fed up. And the big thing that he did recently that they talk about before this return request thing is he has a distribution facility in North Bend, Washington, which is a great town that I want to talk about because it is a town that is right before you go over Snoqualmie Pass. That is in eastern, that's like the road to eastern Washington, essentially, and therefore the rest of the United States by road in Washington. You would go mostly through North Bend and Snoqualmie Pass. Nintendo builds this giant distribution plant in North Bend, and the whole thing about it is it's like all run by robots. Like robots touch everything, move everything, but they also have this crazy tracking system that keeps track of all the retailers' orders. Because usually when a retailer orders something, they figure out all the distribution themselves, right? They get the stuff, they do it. You had to use Nintendo's North Bend distribution facility. So Nintendo saw all of your data of where you were sending consoles to, how many you were sending, what you were selling them for, everything. And companies didn't like this because it was way too transparent to Nintendo.
Yeah, well, it gave them probably information that they could use against those companies, like if they're making different deals and stuff like that.
Totally. Exactly. And the returns, in short, were like the last straw. After this whole North Bend distribution thing, they'd kind of gotten fed up with that, and now this whole return issue. So the meeting in Minneapolis ends with we have to think about it from Target. They're like, we'll get back to you. And they plan to meet again at CES 1992 in Las Vegas. And there's this big thing where their flight is late and they're not up to the hotel. So Arakawa takes a nap. And then when the Minneapolis people get there, he's refusing to wake up, even though they're like right across the sofa from him, like in the living room. And he's like, they're here. They want to know. He's like, what's their answer? And they say, we're not going to do this. And he's like, okay, well, then there's nothing to talk about. And he just rolls over and goes back to sleep. And then Nintendo cuts ties with Target, which is huge.
Dang.
Yeah. And the big thing I'm getting from this too is there's two sides of it. And I think Harris makes a good point in that a lot of it it's just buzzword talking, because from Nintendo never says that they are controlling the other retailers. They say we're innovating how we do this. And this is all a big innovation, like our new system for data tracking and our new distribution center and this new return policy. We're innovating the market. And they use that as a tool to get these retailers to do it. And this is the chapter where Target's like, we're fed up. You're not innovating. You're just trying to control our product. We don't need to sell your stuff. We'll sell Sega. It's not a big deal. And that's how it ends. Well, actually, this chapter ends with an address at CES where Peter Main finally acknowledges the existence of Sega.
Okay.
And says, and questions their sales figures, because Sega is saying that we won the sales figure race, and Nintendo's like, no, we won. And they introduced the Super Scope, and a little side jab at Sega. Peter Main says it's perfect for hedgehog hunting. That's what he says in the speech.
Fighting words.
Which I think is really funny. Yeah, I was like, ooh, he's going for it. I love it. But that's the second chapter. I think this, again, really makes Nintendo look bad, this chapter. So I would definitely take this with a grain of salt.
I want to see the console wars, but told from the Nintendo perspective.
Yeah, right? I think Nintendo wouldn't even call it Console Wars. They'd be like, the SNES story. And they just talk about the SNES.
They just never ever mention the Genesis.
They'd mention Genesis sales figures when they beat Genesis, and then they wouldn't mention it ever other than that. So, because we all know the Super Scope. I mean, it wasn't really that popular as far as I know.
No, I've never used a Super Scope.
I never have either. I feel silly for not using one.
Yeah, well, maybe someday.
Someday we can all dream. So the next chapter is called Sequels, Skirmishes, and Baseball in Seattle. That's right, baseball in Seattle.
We're going to talk about the Mariners?
We're going to talk about my beloved Seattle Mariners.
All right.
Once again, Shinobu Toyota saves the day. That's what this opens with. Okay, now we know he's a spy. He was a spy, but I don't think he's any longer a spy. I think when he works with Kalinsky, it's all legitimate. He's trying to make Sega of America work, right? And the story goes here that Yuji Naka, the creator of Sonic, who is very problematic now, right? I believe.
I think he's a little bit, he's pretty arrogant. There's a little bit of Twitter drama going on with him right now, I think.
So he quit Sega because of a variety of actually very good reasons. First of all, he was only paid $30,000 a year when he made the first Sonic, and that made millions and millions of dollars. His name was not allowed on the credits, so he made a black text on black screen that actually shows everyone's names between the end of the game and like the ending screen of Sega. And that actually has everyone's names on it. It's a little hidden Easter egg he put in Sonic 1, which I think is cool. He took 14 months to complete the game, but Sega was mad because it should only take 10. And then he also asked for an extra person. There was like usually development teams at Sega were 3 people at the time, and he was 4. So he was always kind of pushing Sega's buttons, but then Sega was kind of pushing his buttons, and he had it. So he wasn't treated well, and he quit. That's where we were at. This is before Sonic 2.
Well, you know what they say, if you don't like it, you can quit. And I guess he didn't like it, so he quit.
That's right. And Kalinsky and Toyota are both like, we need him. We need him for Sonic 2. So this is when Kalinsky sends Shinobu Toyota to Japan to look after Naka and tell him like, hey, you can make the game in the United States at the Sega Technical Institute in Palo Alto. This is where Mark Cerny, who created Marble Madness, is. He's like running the studio at the time. Naka accepts because essentially they're like, you can have as big a team as you want. You do whatever you want. We'll pay you a ton of money. Just do it here. And he accepts. And so Toyota kind of makes Sonic 2 happen, which I think is really cool.
Because that could have been a disaster.
It really could have. It could have been a big time disaster. The other thing that they talk about briefly in the chapter, before we get to the big part of it, the baseball part of it, is that the SNES is finally dropping their price, which is kind of a big deal because that says, hey, we don't think we're going to sell any more of this. We're trying to stretch it out.
Mm-hmm.
And so SNES is going to drop from $19.95 to $179.95, and Kalinsky is like, I want to compete, and he throws out the idea of throwing the Genesis for $99.95.
Dang.
Which is real cheap. This is really cheap, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so Toyota and Kalinsky were talking about getting this ready for the first annual Sega Summit in Boca Raton, Florida, when EBVB barges in to show them a press conference with Howard Lincoln that Hiroshi Yamauchi of Nintendo is going to buy, with an investment group, the Seattle Mariners baseball team, my beloved Seattle Mariners. In doing so, he would be the first non-American to own an MLB team, which is a very big deal at the time, because this is 1992. Okay, it's pretty big. This is not Codex, a history of Mike's beloved Seattle Mariners podcast, but to do another TLDR thing of the Mariners and what happened with them. In the 1970s, there was a team called the Seattle Pilots. They had one season in Seattle, and then their owner, Dewey Soriano, was like running out of money, and he tried to sell the team to a guy named Bud Selig, who wanted to move it to Milwaukee. There's a whole hubbub of this attorney that jumps in. His name's Gorton, I think, and he goes in, he tries to stop it from happening. What ends up happening, much like the Seattle Supersonics, is we lost, and we lose the team, and it becomes the Milwaukee Brewers. So the Seattle Pilots left Seattle after one season and became the Milwaukee Brewers.
Dang.
Through the long lawsuit that happened afterward, because the city of Seattle sued Major League Baseball for this, MLB finally gave Seattle an expansion team in 1977. That team became the Seattle Mariners that we know and love. Do you like the Mariners games, Tyler? They're fun.
I do, yeah. I've been to several Mariners games. I get caught up on what's going on with the Mariners every time I call my mom. She tells me how we're doing.
It's good. It's a good thing. It's a fun.
If I had a favorite
experience.
baseball team, it's definitely the Mariners. I'm not really into baseball, but Mariners are my favorite baseball team.
That's great because now we don't have to fight. That's perfect. Okay, so all is well with the Mariners from the 70s up until this point in the 90s. And Jeff Smulyan, I think that's how you say it, Smulyan, wants to leave Seattle. And he wants to take the Mariners with him to Florida.
No.
Once again, there's a whole hubbub like, don't take the team away. We can't do this, right? There's the Kingdom. It's a beautiful place. And so what ends up happening is Hiroshi Yamauchi, at the urging of Minoru Arakawa, buy this baseball team. Buy this baseball team, support the city of Seattle. We're a big company here. We should support them, right? But to make it seem less like a foreign takeover of baseball, they enlist some other investors from Seattle to jump in and be like minority stake owners. And they form the Seattle Baseball Club is what they're called. So Hiroshi Yamauchi is he's the main person that owned the team, but there were other people that were minority investors in this. So what Hiroshi Yamauchi and Minoru Arakawa did was great because they kept baseball and the Mariners in Seattle, right? That's good. But the best part of this whole thing to me is that neither one of them care about baseball. They just don't like it. They just don't care.
If only they could have done this for the Supersonics,
I mean, hey, it's going to happen again. We're going to get another basketball team. We got Climate Pledge Arena now. It's going to be good. So
let's go.
That's the short redacted version. There's a much longer version in the book that I skipped a lot of drama, but this is the very TLDR of it. I'm excited that they even mentioned the Seattle Mariners in this video game book. That makes me happy.
Yeah, me too. And it's kind of it'll come back later because it sort of helps to illustrate some of the geopolitical tensions between Japan and the United States that were starting to brew in the early 90s. So, yeah, we'll get there in a second, though. Chapter 24 is a very, very short chapter. It's called, and must be in Icelandic, it's called Fjörfring Sindana.
I was so excited that you were going to take this chapter because I didn't want to try to say that.
It's about Olaf Olafsson, and how he's writing a novel. That's the name of the novel. It's Icelandic for The Forgiveness of Sins, and it did really well. He got nominated for an Icelandic Literary Prize. But the other part of this chapter is that inside Sony, there are two camps starting to emerge. There's the old guard that wanted to be in video games, but they only wanted to be in video games if they could do it with Nintendo, i.e., the Nintendo PlayStation. And then there's the new guard, which is the younger people who also wanted to be in video games. They wanted to go their own way and do video games on their own. And I wrote down in here sang a version of Go Your Own Way by Fleetwood Mac. That's Fleetwood Mac's song, right?
I think it is, but I think you have to sing it.
Go Your Own Way.
Thank you. That's what everyone wanted.
Yeah. So they wanted to do video games on their own. But Olafsson, he had a plan that would appease both sides, or he hoped that would. And then the chapter ends. I'm not really sure what the deal is with this chapter. They just really wanted to talk about Olafsson writing a book.
I think they wanted to show. I mean, I think it's Olafsson writing a book, but then PlayStation's on its way. That's the big. Yeah, that's the big thing. That's
what's going down here. So then we move into chapter 25, which is called Back to Work. The number 2, Back to Work. And we are back to Codex History of the Seattle Mariners, of Mike's beloved Seattle Mariners, because Madeline Schroeder is discussing the Mariners acquisition, Nintendo's Mariners acquisition with Nilsson. That's not Nintendo buying the thing, but it's Arakawa and all of those folks, or Yamauchi. So they're making up names for the team. What could we name this? The Seattle Koopa Troopas, the Seattle Super Nintendos, which they would then have to change the name of if every console came out, or even the Seattle Power Gloves.
I think the Seattle Power Gloves is a really cool name.
I like that. The Seattle Super Nintendos is cool if they changed it every single time. Just imagine, I probably would have been a baseball fan. I would have watched the Seattle Nintendo 64s play for sure.
The Seattle Wii.
Yeah, the Seattle Wiis, the Seattle GameCubes. They would be the Seattle Switches now, which is you can be a switch hitter, right?
That's actually a cool baseball term. Yeah, that would work good. Yeah. I like the Seattle Power Gloves, though.
Seattle Power Gloves is pretty good. But eventually they just realized that Nintendo's going to keep it the Mariners, mostly because Nintendo's super boring and they don't really like to shake things up.
That's something I forgot to mention in the chapter is that they did actually intentionally say, we're not going to run. They left the running of the team up mostly to that group of minority stake owners that have because they're like, we don't want to mess with the baseball team. We just want to keep it in Seattle. That was their whole goal, was just to use the money to keep it in Seattle, which is
and
very
like
good way to ingratiate yourself to a city.
Yeah, well, like you said, it wasn't about the baseball. It was really just about sort of trying to like have a PR win. But I don't know if they got that PR win because there were some escalating tensions at the time between Japan and the United States. And so it kind of felt more like, oh, these Japanese company, which, because it was often spun in the news as like Nintendo is buying the Mariners, which wasn't entirely true, like technically true, but that made for good headlines. And it made it seem like, the Japanese are coming in and they're buying up all of our American stuff. Next thing you know, they'll be buying up apple pie and American flags and stuff like that. And it was like, I don't think it was quite the win that they wanted it to be. Maybe a win for Seattle, but not a win for like overall geopolitical tensions, probably.
Yeah, it's mostly a win for me. I'm selfish, so.
Well, hey, the Mariners are still in Seattle.
They were a sponsor up until pretty recently. There was Nintendo stuff all over the stadium.
Do they not own anymore? Is it
I
still
don't
owned
think
by...
they own as much of a stake anymore. I think they still might have a little bit of it, but like they don't have all the Nintendo signs up anymore.
Yeah.
When Pokemon Go came out, they had like a ton of Pokestops and gyms in Safeco Field. Well, now it's called T-Mobile Park, and then they had really cool like Street Pass stuff with 3DS and 2DS for a long time, where you could like meet up at these little spots and play games with people. It was really felt like it was you're going to a baseball game, but also kind of having a Nintendo party at the same time.
All right. That's two things I love, Nintendo parties and baseball games. Well, I don't know if I love baseball games, but I do love Nintendo parties.
When both of them have garlic fries, it's a great thing.
Three things I love: garlic fries, Nintendo parties, and baseball games.
Let us know, codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com, how much you love garlic fries. Just tell us.
Yeah.
We won't read it on the podcast, but we'll get it and we'll know.
Oh, I had garlic fries. I went to a baseball game when I was in South Korea recently. I went to a baseball game and they had garlic fries and chicken there. And actually, one of the guy who played on the Mariners was playing on the team. I got his jersey and everything.
That's so awesome.
Bringing it full circle. It's related to the Mariners, which is
full
apparently
circle.
Codex today is all about the Mariners.
Really is.
Well, enough baseball. We got to talk about the Sonic 2 marketing plans. So Sega had until October to like sort of figure out what they were going to do with Sonic 2 marketing plans, but they were pretty sure it was going to end up being like November. Schroeder and Nilsson, they were like, this is probably going to be more like November because this is video games and they never come out on time. Even in the 90s, video games never came out on time. Schroeder had been able to go to Palo Alto to check on the progress of the game pretty regularly, and she was happy that it wasn't just a redo of Sonic 1. It was like a new game that with all kinds of new stuff in it. She was pretty happy about that, but she's like, this is going to take longer than we think it's going to take. And the book takes an aside at this point about like how sequels are kind of hard. Like even Nintendo had trouble with sequels. Do you remember Super Mario 2 / Doki Doki Panic, that whole deal where they just sort of rebranded another game and called it Super Mario 2, at least in the US. And then they did have a Super Mario Brothers 2 in Japan with just a bunch of really hard. It was just the same thing as Super Mario Brothers, but just the levels were like super extra hard.
That's the lost levels in America, right?
The lost levels, in America. So they were having trouble with sequels too, and so Sonic. She was happy that Sonic looked like it was a worthy sequel. And also at this time, it's kind of important to note for Sonic, this isn't really in the book, but for Sonic, there was the Sonic 2 was being developed at Sega Technical Institute, but Sega of Japan was also making their own Sonic game, and that would go on to become Sonic CD. So Sonic CD came out after Sonic 2, but it feels a little bit more like a Sonic 1.5. It's a little bit closer in some ways to the original Sonic. But then, of course, it has the CD thing that it can take advantage of. So the music is much better. It has a little bit more of like non-linear vibe to it. It's more of a slower platformer than the like speed-based platformer that Sonic 2 was. So it's just a very different game. But Sega of Japan was also making their own Sonic sequel at this time. But back to Schroeder and Nilsson, they were having some trouble with the marketing. Their plan's good, but like it just wasn't really flashy or different enough. They were just like, we're just kind of doing the same thing we did for the first Sonic. And Nilsson wanted more, and Schroeder's like, this is fine. We're doing a good job here. This is our job. And the book has them having a shouting match in there, which I don't know if that really happened or not. That seems like something a book would make up to make things dramatic.
Yeah, make office drama a thing.
Yeah, but then Nilsson comes up with the idea for Sonic Tuesday. That's the number 2. which is like a global launch date where Japan, USA, and Europe would all get the game on the same day to make it a huge launch, which is pretty normal now, like to have a game come out on a specific day. But back then, games didn't really have release dates. They just sort of came out when they came out. You just like, when the game was done, you started shipping it to retailers, and then when they got it, they just put it out. And so some companies or some retailers would get it earlier than others, and some of them wouldn't have put it out yet. It was just kind of, it was a free-for-all, sort of. But they wanted a concerted effort to say, no, this day is the day that Sonic 2 comes out across the world. Which is pretty innovative for the time, honestly. And even still, for a long time after that, worldwide launches weren't really a thing because they're so hard to coordinate. They're less hard to coordinate these days, but they were very hard back in the day. So they started making tons of like too puns. They had too fast, too cool, too rad, too day. And they're like printing them out and like putting them up on the walls, and they're having a great time. And even Blake J. Harris gets in on the fun with this quote from this chapter. Nilsson took a step back and watched the impromptu collage come together, too impressed to speak. Then he got over himself and went back to work.
Oh,
so, great job, Mr.
A little
Harris.
humor. Love it.
Yeah. So we do get a little bit more history with the Mariners. Bill White over at Nintendo is just like, the phone is just ringing off the hook. Like, why would Nintendo buy a baseball team? Were they going to rename it? Would the Seattle Super Mario sound too much like the Seattle Supersonics? And he's like, Nintendo didn't even buy this baseball team. It was just people who also own Nintendo also own this baseball team. But he's having to field these questions from reporters all day as if Nintendo just bought the Seattle Mariners. He was pretty upset about that. But yeah, the book sort of uses that to highlight that xenophobia that was sort of building against Japan in the early 90s in the United States. So I don't need to go into that again. But there were also tensions rising between Bill White in marketing and then Arakawa in product development because they had the classic problem where marketing is nothing if they don't have a product to sell, but the product also doesn't have anything is nothing if the marketing doesn't sell it. And so they're starting to clash now because it's in the good old days when everything's going great, it's easy to just high five each other, say, hey, everybody's doing awesome. But right now, Sega is starting to creep up. They're starting to become a little bit more of a threat. And Nintendo has been ignoring them for so long that they sort of allowed them to become this threat. And so now that things aren't going so good, we're starting to see this clash between marketing and product development, where marketing wants to have a little bit more of a say in product development, and product development is like, just sell our game, just put it on the shelves. Why is your job even important, right? Like, if the game's good, it'll sell, and we don't need you to sell it for us. And so they don't always see eye to eye, which is a bit of a problem. So
it is a problem. Yeah.
So that's kind of where we leave here. It's like Sega is starting to become a much bigger deal for Nintendo. And they had, when Sega was sort of like making fun of Nintendo and punching up to like compare themselves to Nintendo was taking the high road, not really acknowledging Sega. They're like, whatever, they're just a small dog. They'll tire themselves out and then we'll just go back to whatever we were doing. But that approach for Nintendo did not work because they did not stamp out the menace that was Sega. This is from Nintendo's perspective. I love Sega. I don't think they're a menace, but Nintendo would have seen them as a menace. If they had stomped it out and been a little bit more aggressive earlier on, maybe they could have put Sega out of business, but now Sega's too big and Nintendo has a threat. And Sonic is verifiably cooler than Mario. If you check all the focus groups that are happening, kids are liking Sonic much more than Mario, and that's going to be a problem for Nintendo. So that's kind of where we leave. Yeah.
All right. Well, Tyler, what you been playing?
I've been playing a little bit of Persona 4, and I think today I'm going to buy Xenoblade Chronicles 3.
Ooh, you're making a new game purchase.
I know.
Today.
I wanted to play more Persona games, but I just can't really bring myself to play right now. It's just I played so much Persona the last couple of weeks with Strikers that I'm kind of
really have. I've been impressed. I've been like, hey, you want a game? You're like, I'm playing Persona, and I'm like, man, going for it. I'm
a little Persona burnt, so I might fire up Xenoblade Chronicles 3 because it just came out this last week, and it's like the cool game, and maybe I will be able to talk about it when it's relevant instead of waiting 3 years and buying it at half price and then being not able to talk about it with other people because they've already all played it and forgotten about it. So usually I don't play games as soon as they come out, but I'm thinking this might be an exception here. So we'll see, I guess. But that's kind of it. What have you been playing?
Well, I thought I was going to finish Wolfenstein 2, the new Colossus, this week. And what ended up happening is I've been getting sidetracked by these assassination missions because I know if you do all of them, it adds like an extra level to the game, and I want to play the extra level. But they're really annoying. Like, it feels like busy work. And I'm thinking I might just skip them and beat the game and then watch a YouTube video of the extra level.
Yeah, sometimes that's what you got to do.
It's just is a lot of extra time. It's a lot more time than I thought. So I haven't made the decision yet, but I'm getting close to the end there. It's really fun, though. I got to go to Venus.
Nice.
There's a Nazi base on Venus, apparently. And it's very interesting. Yeah,
this Wolfenstein game is very different from the original Wolfenstein game.
They go weird. This game gets weird. And I'm thinking I'm going to do like a whole history of Wolfenstein because the early games are like classics, and then there's a couple that fail. Like I want to say the 2009 remake wasn't very popular with people, but I want to kind of talk about that, and I want to talk about these new games because pretty interesting. And the fact that most of them are on Game Pass, and they are really linear. This is the first one that doesn't have like fully linear levels. It seems like you can like do these assassination missions, and there's like a map, and you're essentially liberating the U.S. is what you're doing because this is an alternate reality where the Nazis won World War II, and you have to like liberate it. But it's good. It's a good game. I'm enjoying it, and it's on Game Pass. So, but I also do feel like I'm playing this game that came out in 2017. Like this is a 5-year-old game, and I'm just now playing it. So whatever. But it's fun. So I'm enjoying myself. Now, here's the big thing, Tyler. I didn't tell you this, but we're gonna do a mailbag next week. I told Tyler that. That's the plan. So if you want to send us emails, please do. We're gonna do a mailbag next week because we love those. I want to play an impromptu game of 20 questions where you ask me the questions. Can we do that?
Oh, okay, sure.
I found a game I had an epiphany when we started recording. I think I found a fun game to have you guess for 20 questions.
Okay. All right. Is this game released before the year 2000?
Yes.
Okay.
Pre-2000.
Pre-2000. Was this game released before 1990?
No.
Okay.
It's not released before 1990.
So we're looking at the 90s here. Is this game a system exclusive for whatever system it is?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, wait. I have to elaborate. I guess no. It wasn't exclusive for a year. It was an exclusive for a year.
Oh,
is what
okay.
I'll say.
Wow, that gives me some. Okay, so was the console it originally released on CD based?
No.
Okay, so a 90s.
Is that 4 questions or 3 questions?
I think that's 4.
4. Okay, I'm glad you're honest.
90s game that was originally released on a cartridge. So we're not talking about any of the Tony Hawk games because those came out on PlayStation first. Is this a Nintendo game?
Yes.
Okay. For a Nintendo system, I guess is.
Yes, I wouldn't count that as 2 questions. That's
okay, so it's probably a Super Nintendo game. Or a Nintendo 64 game.
Okay. Are those questions? Those
no,
aren't questions. That's you thinking out loud.
Yeah, I'm thinking
it's important to do because this is a podcast. It's good that you're thinking out loud. You're a professional radio man.
So it's either a Super Nintendo game or a Nintendo 64 game. I guess it could be an NES game because NES games did come out into the 90s, but I'm gonna make an assumption here and assume that it's not that. So is this a Nintendo 64 game?
Yes.
Okay, great.
I'm such a fanboy. You know I am.
Yeah. Ah, gosh, I love Nintendo 64.
3D, it was so exciting. Look at those polygons. They look terrible now, but back then, oof, amazing.
Okay, so it was an exclusive.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot to narrow down. This is a lot to narrow down right now.
Okay, so it was an exclusive for a year, so that means it's not made by Nintendo, because otherwise it would have been an exclusive forever. So the game is some sort of third-party game. It's not a Rare game because that, again, would have been an exclusive in those days.
You're only at 6 questions, and you've done quite a bit of narrowing. I'm impressed.
Is the game a first-person shooter?
Let me double check because I just want to make sure I'm honest here. I guess I would have to say yes and no.
Okay.
You can switch between. Try, I'm looking up gameplay here. Oh, it's not. Sorry. According to Wikipedia, it is not a first-person shooter.
Okay.
Strong stance, not a first-person shooter.
Strong stance, not a first-person shooter.
I'll tell you why that was confusing to me when we're done with this.
Okay. Is this a game that I grew up with?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay.
I think this is a game that you would know of, for sure. And I've mentioned to you before. Does that count as a question?
Okay. It is this a Star Wars game?
It sure is.
Is this game Shadows of the Empire?
It sure is.
Yes. Because it came out on PC a year after it came out on Nintendo 64.
And the reason that I was confused is because it's a third-person shooter when you're playing just as Dash Rendar on foot, but you can switch between third and first when you're in a ship.
Yeah,
so
okay.
It's confusing to me, but this is considered technically a third-person shooter.
Yeah.
But I love this game. I think about this game. I have this game. I think about it all the time. I think it's a great game. A hidden gem to me.
I never played it because the daycare that I went to as a small child had Nintendo 64. And they had this game, but it was rated teen, and they wouldn't let us play it. It was for the dad of the house.
I want to burn that daycare to the ground. Is that strong?
That's very strong. Those are extremely nice people. Please don't do
that.
that.
I won't do that. I'm sorry, everybody. Sorry, everyone just saw my monster come out because someone made fun of Star Wars Shadow of the Empire.
They didn't even make fun of it. They just wouldn't let me play it because it was
You know what?
They
denied you of it.
They denied me Star Wars Shadows of the Empire.
There's no blood in it. It's like you shoot a guy and it little poof, and then they fall. The death animations in this game are hilarious because they just like fall backwards.
Yeah. Well, when you run a daycare, I think you're a little extra conservative about the things you allow the kids to play. Like we weren't even watching Power Rangers or anything like that at this place, you know?
I think what you just learned is that I could never run a daycare. I think that's what the whole listenership just learned. But yeah. I am glad you guessed it. I was worried I was being too vague with my answers, but yeah, it's not an exclusive then because it came out on Windows a little less than a year later. It came out in North America on December 3rd, 1996, and then came out for Windows in September 17th, 1997.
Yeah, I want to say it's on Good Old Games too.
I think so. I might. It's weird. I kind of want to play it on PC because I tried to play it on 64 and it's hard to control.
It's pretty rough. It's $6 on Good Old Games.
Oh, it's a great game. I love this game. Sorry, I just was thinking about this game earlier today, and I'm like, this would be a great 20 questions for Tyler because I think
that was pretty
a
good.
game that you know.
We may need to change our 20 questions to like 10 because I feel like we get there pretty quick. Like nobody's going to lose this 20 questions game, you know?
I'm pretty sure there's been a couple where I've gotten to like 14 or 15 questions. Okay. So I would like to keep it to 20 if possible for the sake of easy mode. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Right. What if we call it a gentleman's 10 questions, which means you go up to 10, and if you say gentleman's 10, you get to go to 20. And you're not technically lost. You just know it's a gentleman's 10.
Yeah. Okay.
Does that work?
That works.
All right. Sorry, we're changing your rules, Mo. That's okay.
We'll never climb the ranked ladder if we don't play the official rules.
That's true. We're never going to climb the ladder. So we are doing a mailbag next week. That's something we should say off the bat. We have some emails like in the can, and I think it would be fun if people sent us more emails and sent us more messages on Discord, and we would love to do a discussion mailbag next week. I kind of like doing the book one week and like a discussion episode the next week. I'm kind of playing with that, and that's fun for us to do too.
We should do another tier list too. So if you have ideas for another tier list you would like us to do, let us know.
Yeah, that would be great. Also tell us your opinions on garlic fries. I lied. I probably will read them on the podcast because I love garlic fries so much. So, and with that, if you want to send us an email, codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com. You can join our Discord either through the email or by clicking on the link on my Twitter profile at mecoletta, MECOLETTA. Tyler's on Twitter too at SneakerElfELPH. If you want to support the show, the best thing you can do for us is tell your friends and then rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever. Follow us on Spotify, I think is what you do. But it helps us out a lot. And that's it for the day. Do you want to say bye to everybody, Tyler?
Sure. Goodbye, everybody.